The Irish Civil War followed the Irish War of Independence and accompanied the establishment of the Irish Free State, an entity independent from the United Kingdom but within the British Empire. The conflict was waged between two opposing groups, Irish Republicans and Irish nationalists, over the Anglo-Irish Treaty. The forces of the Provisional Government supported the treaty, while the Republican opposition saw it as a betrayal of the Irish Republic. Many of those who fought in the conflict had been members of the Irish Republican Army during the War of Independence. The Civil War was won by the Free State forces, which were heavily armed with weapons provided by the British government. The conflict claimed more lives than the War of Independence that preceded it, and left Irish society divided and embittered for generations. Today, two of the main political parties in the Republic of Ireland, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, are direct descendants of the opposing sides of the war. Background: the treaty and its consequences. The Anglo-Irish Treaty was agreed to end the 1919–1921 Irish War of Independence between the Irish Republic and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. The treaty provided for a self-governing Irish state, having its own army and police. The treaty also allowed Northern Ireland to opt out of the new state and return to the United Kingdom, which it did immediately. However, rather than creating the independent republic favoured by most nationalists, the Irish Free State would be an autonomous dominion of the British Empire with the British monarch as head of state, in the same manner as Canada and Australia. The British suggested this dominion in secret correspondence even before treaty negotiations began. But Sinn Féin leader Eamon de Valera rejected the dominion. The treaty also stipulated that members of the new Irish Oireachtas would have to take the following oath of allegiance: I do solemnly swear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the Irish Free State as by law established, and that I will be faithful to His Majesty King George V, his heirs and successors by law in virtue of the common citizenship of Ireland with Great Britain and her adherence to and membership of the group of nations forming the British Commonwealth of Nations. This oath was highly objectionable to many Irish Republicans. Furthermore, the partition of Ireland, which had already been decided by the Westminster Parliament in the Government of Ireland Act 1920, was effectively confirmed in the Anglo-Irish Treaty. The most contentious areas of the treaty for the IRA were the disestablishment of the Irish Republic declared in 1919, the abandonment of the First Dáil, the status of the Irish Free State as a dominion in the British Commonwealth, and the British retention of the so-called strategic treaty ports on Ireland's south coast which were to remain occupied by the Royal Navy. All these issues were the cause of a split in the IRA, and ultimately civil war. Michael Collins, the Republican leader who had led the Irish negotiating team, argued that the treaty gave not the ultimate freedom that all nations aspire and develop, but the freedom to achieve freedom. However, anti-treaty militants in 1922 believed that the treaty would never deliver full Irish independence. Split in the nationalist movement. The split over the treaty was deeply personal. Many of the leaders on both sides had been close friends and comrades during the War of Independence. This made their disagreement over the treaty all the more bitter. Michael Collins later said that Eamon de Valera had sent him as plenipotentiary to negotiate the treaty because he knew that the British would not concede an independent Irish Republic and wanted Collins to take the blame for the compromise settlement. He said that he felt deeply betrayed when de Valera refused to stand by the agreement that the plenipotentiaries had negotiated with David Lloyd George and Winston Churchill. De Valera, for his part, was furious that Collins and Arthur Griffith had signed the treaty without consulting him or the Irish cabinet as instructed. Dáil narrowly passed the Anglo-Irish Treaty by 64 votes to 57 on 7 January 1922. Following the treaty's ratification, in accordance with Article 17 of the treaty, the British recognised provisional government of the Irish Free State was established. Its authority under the treaty was to provide a provisional arrangement for the administration of Southern Ireland during the interval before the establishment of the Irish Free State. In accordance with the treaty, the British government transferred the powers and machinery requisite for the discharge of its duties. Before the British government transferred such powers, the members of the Provisional Government each signified in writing their acceptance of the treaty. Upon the treaty's ratification, de Valera resigned as President of the Republic and failed to be re-elected by an even closer vote of 60 to 58. He challenged the right of the Dáil to approve the treaty, saying that its members were breaking their oath to the Irish Republic. De Valera continued to promote a compromise whereby the new Irish Free State would be in external association with the British Commonwealth rather than be a member of it. In early March, he formed the Cumann na Poblachta party while remaining a member of Sinn Féin and commenced a speaking tour of the more republican province of Munster on 17 March 1922. During the tour, de Valera made controversial speeches at Carrick-on-Suir, Lismore, Dungarvan and Waterford, saying at one point, if the treaty were accepted, the fight for freedom would still go on, and the Irish people, instead of fighting foreign soldiers, will have to fight the Irish soldiers of an Irish government set up by Irishmen, at Thurles. Several days later, he repeated this imagery and added that the IRA would have to wade through the blood of the soldiers of the Irish government, and perhaps through that of some members of the Irish government to get their freedom. In a letter to the Irish Independent on 23 March, de Valera accepted the accuracy of their report of his comment about wading through blood, but deplored that the newspaper had published it. More seriously, many Irish Republican Army officers were also against the treaty, and in March 1922 an ad hoc Army convention repudiated the authority of the Dáil to accept the treaty. In contrast, the Minister of Defence, Richard Mulcahy, stated in the Dáil on 28 April that conditions in Dublin had prevented a convention from being held, but that delegates had been selected and voted by ballot to accept the oath. The anti-treaty IRA formed their own army executive, which they declared to be the real government of the country, despite the result of the 1921 general election. On 26 April, the Minister of Defence, Richard Mulcahy, summarised alleged illegal activities by many IRA men over the previous 3 months, whom he described as seceding volunteers, including hundreds of robberies. Yet this fragmenting army was the only police force on the ground following the disintegration of the Irish Republican Police and the disbanding of the Royal Irish Constabulary. By putting 10 questions to General Mulcahy on 28 April, Sean McEntee argued that the Army Executive had acted continuously on its own to create a republic since 1917, had an unaltered constitution, had never fallen under the control of the Dáil, and that the only body competent to dissolve the volunteer executive was a duly convened convention of the Irish Republican Army, not the Dáil. By accepting the treaty in January and abandoning the Republic, the Dáil majority had effectively deserted the Army Executive. In his reply, Mulcahy rejected this interpretation. Then, in a debate on defence, McEntee suggested that supporting the Army Executive, even if it meant the scrapping of the treaty and terrible and immediate war with England, would be better than the civil war which we are beginning at present. Apparently, McEntee's supporters added that the many robberies complained of by Mulcahy on 26 April were caused by the lack of payment and provision by the Dáil to the volunteers. Delay until the June election. Collins established an Army Reunification Committee to reunite the IRA and organised an election pact with de Valera's anti-treaty political followers to campaign jointly in the Free State's first election in 1922 and form a coalition government afterwards. He also tried to reach a compromise with anti-treaty IRA leaders by agreeing to a Republican-type constitution for the new state. IRA leaders such as Liam Lynch were prepared to accept this compromise. However, the proposal for a Republican constitution was vetoed by the British as being contrary to the terms of the treaty, and they threatened military intervention in the Free State unless the treaty were fully implemented. Collins reluctantly agreed. This completely undermined the electoral pact between the pro- and anti-treaty factions, who went into the Irish general election on the 18th of June 1922 as hostile parties, both calling themselves Sinn Féin. The pro-treaty Sinn Féin party won the election with 239,193 votes to 133,864 for anti-treaty Sinn Féin. A further 247,226 people voted for other parties, most of whom supported the treaty. Labour's 132,570 votes were ambiguous with regard to the treaty. According to Hopkinson, Irish Labour and Union leaders, while generally pro-treaty, made little attempt to lead opinion during the treaty conflict, casting themselves rather as attempted peacemakers. The election showed that a majority of the Irish electorate accepted the treaty and the foundation of the Irish Free State. But de Valera, his political followers and most of the IRA continued to oppose the treaty. De Valera is quoted as saying, "The majority have no right to do wrong." Meanwhile, under the leadership of Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith, the pro-treaty provisional government set about establishing the Irish Free State, and organised the National Army, to replace the IRA, and a new police force. However, since it was envisaged that the new army would be built around the IRA, anti-treaty IRA units were allowed to take over British barracks and take their arms. In practice, this meant that by the summer of 1922, the Provisional Government of Southern Ireland controlled only Dublin and some other areas like County Longford where the IRA units supported the treaty. Fighting ultimately broke out when the Provisional Government tried to assert its authority over well-armed and intransigent anti-treaty IRA units around the country, particularly a hardline group in Dublin.